Previously,
I've noticed that both you, Spino, and Thunderfoot had grossly misrepresented Lord Southern. Where did this animosity come from? It wasn't always like this. There was a time, not too long ago, when Spino was very fond of Lauren, but something changed. Could it be due to mere political disagreements? Sure, people are passionate about politics, but there's no need to make personal political and political personal. Or maybe it was personal. In this case, well, you need to learn to accept rejection. Hello, shitlords and shitladies. There have been some new developments surrounding the Spino Saga since I made my previous video about him. Everyone loves juicy drama, and the drama I'm going to talk about today was quite spectacular. I witnessed it as it was unfolding, and I've even contributed to it. If drama isn't your cup of tea, don't worry. I'm also going to use it as an excuse to expand on some topics I covered in my previous video about Spino, and correct some misconceptions he and some other people have about Marxism, Nazism and fascism. Because bringing up those topics never causes a shitstorm. Anyways, let's get right into the news. For the last several days, Spino has been busy parroting Thunderfoot and ranting about how toxic the anti-HW community has become. He blatantly lies that the only reason people turned on him was that he dared to criticize a large figure. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's hilarious that he accuses others of unethical behavior, as if his constant lies are ethical. Other statements he made are just as hilarious. So, Rebel Media is a white nationalist platform now? I guess that's why they posted this video.
In every political ideology or movement, there are idiots on the fringe that the world would be better off without. Liberals have social justice warriors and Black Lives Matter. Conservatives have the alt-right white nationalists.
As for literal fascists, I don't think that Spino understands fascism enough to make such statements. More on that later. According to Spino, these three gentlemen are outcasts because of the legitimate criticism of shitty beliefs. A statement that couldn't have been further from the truth. Cock of Dusty is an irrelevant have-been, a loud idiot who creates pointless controversy to generate views. His two videos about Trump, Clinton and the alt-right were among the dumbest shit I've seen on YouTube. And that includes videos made by flat earthers. Making a whole video where not a single statement is correct is almost impressive. Vadim Nyquist is a failed comedian and a closeted SJW. He was never important enough to be considered an outcast now. As for Thunderfoot, well, people turn on him for the same reason they turned on Spino. Lies, inability to admit his own mistakes, his ignorance, arrogance and condescension. I'm probably going to make a separate video about Thunderfoot, so I won't go into much detail here. By the way, have you noticed the contradiction? Spino claims that people turned against him because he criticized Sargon, and yet nobody complains that the community turned against them after they criticized Thunderfoot. I've been very critical of him and his shitty behavior, and my fellow shitlords and shitladies supported me. Back to our hero. As you can see, while he condemns others for mistreating their fellow anti-HWs, he has no problem attacking people he dislikes. He does not substantiate these claims in any way. We are supposed to listen and believe, if that was not bad enough. Here he decides to show his devotion to ideological purity. You don't even need to have any problematic beliefs yourself. Merely being friends with someone Spino disapproves of is enough to be judged. And if that wasn't bad enough on its own, he shows his utter and total hypocrisy by his unwillingness to apply the same standard to himself. Apparently it's absolutely haram to be associated with anyone he classifies as a literal fascist, using a very figurative sense of the word literal, while it's perfectly fine for him to be buddies with actual communists, because special pleading. Take note, this will be important later. When I saw such a display of hypocrisy, moral grandstanding and virtue signaling, I couldn't let it slide. I spent several days shitposting about him, and this shitposting inspired V to make a video about him. That video caused Spino's meltdown. According to him, V is a creature not unlike a child rapist that hunts down and destroys virtuous paladins like Spino. Sadly, I have missed the culmination of this meltdown. It happened while I was asleep. Apparently Spino has faked his own doxing, then revealed that it was just a ruse.
Very fake news.
Unsurprisingly, this angered the few supporters he still had. Shortly after, he nuked his Twitter profile, and several hours later, he also nuked his parody account Hard On for Assad, and unlisted his YouTube videos. This might be the last chapter of his saga, unless he comes back after a while. Now, in the beginning, I showed a segment from my previous video about him where I theorized about the reason for his seething hatred for Lauren Southern. I think now I have an answer. According to Lauren herself, this is what happened. You might be surprised by such an overreaction, but to me it actually makes sense. Assuming that it's true, it confirms my suspicion about Spino. Before I continue, a disclaimer. I am not a mental health professional. I'm just an idiot on the internet. Take the following with a grain of salt. Having said that, I'm no stranger to playing an armchair psychologist, and I am actually sitting in an armchair right now. So, let's begin. Spino's behavior, especially lately, made him suspect that he might have a cluster B personality disorder. The one that fits the most seems to be histrionic. Here's a list of characteristics, with the relevant ones highlighted. Tendency to believe that relationships are more intimate than they actually are would explain why he overreacted to the fact that Lauren didn't respond to his messages. Other symptoms help explain his antics and are consistent with what could be observed. Some of his statements, like this one, might indicate narcissism, which isn't actually surprising. In any case, since I am not qualified to diagnose him, I leave the judgment up to you, dear viewer. With that out of the way, there's one more thing I'd like to discuss. Spino was very eager to condemn what he perceived to be fascism and Nazism, but at the same time, he showed a lot of lenience towards Marxist socialism. His reasoning shows a fundamental lack of understanding of those ideologies. In fact, I'm going to make a case that using his own criteria out of these three, he should be leaning more towards fascism. Now, before we continue, this should go without saying. I am not implying that any of these three cancerous ideologies is good. In fact, my biggest problem with all of them is something they all have in common: big government. An economic system with central planning has a single point of failure. One mistake can make the whole economy crash and burn, and even without such a catastrophic screw-up, the system is unlikely to be running optimally. Plus, such systems are doomed to be rife with corruption, abuse of power, and human rights violations. So, no, I am not saying that any of these three ideologies are good. What I am saying is that using Spino's own criteria, fascism is the lesser of three evils. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty. This screenshot shows his dangerous ignorance and lack of understanding. Marxism, just like fascism and Nazism, cannot be reduced to obscure views on economics. Wonder if Spino has actually read the works of Marx, or at least knows what they are about. One of the central themes of Marxism is the idea of class struggle. The word struggle should be a hint to what it entails. Russia had a civil war and several purges. China had its Cultural Revolution. And even Cuba had a history of persecuting undesirables. Oh, and if you think that the good old anti-Semitism wasn't practiced in the USSR, you are mistaken. So, what about fascism? Unlike Hitler, Mussolini didn't view race as an important factor. In the book Talks with Mussolini, he is quoted as saying, "Of course there are no pure races left. Not even the Jews have kept their blood unmingled. Successful crossings have often promoted the energy and the beauty of a nation. Race, it's a feeling, not a reality. 95% at least is a feeling. Nothing will ever make me believe that biologically pure races can be shown to exist today." Moreover, while fascism has its roots in socialism, namely syndicalism, Mussolini made the right decision to ditch the idea of class struggle, thus avoiding the bloody conflict that is pretty much inevitable when building a Marxist society. In the book The Myth of the Nation and the Vision of a Revolution by Jacob Tellman, he is quoted as saying, "Like communists, we believe in the necessity for a centralized and unitary state, imposing an iron discipline on everyone, but with the difference that they reach this conclusion through the idea of class. We through the idea of the nation." If that wasn't enough, How about this quote from his speech in Milan? Fascism establishes the real equality of individuals before the nation. The object of the regime in the economic field is to ensure higher social justice for the whole of the Italian people. What does social justice mean? It means work guaranteed, fair wages, decent homes. It means the possibility of continuous evolution and improvement. This already sounds quite similar to Spino's present political views, especially if we take into account that socialist healthcare was a part of welfare program of the fascist party. So, using his own reasoning, Spino should be more receptive to fascism than to Marxism. Well, this was my slightly controversial take on the whole Spino situation. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment if you liked the video or if you think I got something wrong. And since I mentioned Thunderfoot, would you like me to make a video about him as well? Leave a comment. That'll be all. As always, it was my privilege. His ignorance, arrogance, and condescension. Like communists, we believe in the... Fuck.